Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today is a very, very different episode. I have the wonderful Dr. Susan Kahn on the show, but I'm not going to be interviewing her today. She's going to be interviewing me. And it was an idea that came many months ago when I was talking about my book. I'm not going to mention my book too much. I know people get fed up with that. And she said, why don't I interview you for a change? And so I've got Susan here today. Susan is a business psychologist and written a couple of books herself, and I've got to know over the last few years, and she's been on my podcast numerous times. So I'm going to hand over to you, Susan, and be in your hands and be in that scary moment of being the guest on my own show. Very strange.
Well, welcome, Julian, to your very own show. And thank you for giving me the chance to host. And I think that in itself, it's an interesting experience when you take up a different role to one you're usually occupying. So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to ask you some questions. You're always generous when we have our interviews. So I look forward to having a chance to talk to you about your book, but also about you, the man, and to give you a chance to share a bit more about yourself and the way you work. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great, Susan. Yeah,
Okay,
brilliant.
good. Well, I mean, your book, Weathering the Storm, is about resilient teams. And I just was struck by the themes you mentioned around change and uncertainty and failure, things that those of us who work with people come across a lot. But I just wondered what it was that you felt was important to say about teams in particular.
Yeah, I think that my focus on teams is my love of working in teams. I think that comes from my corporate days. And I remember when I, went as a coach sort of a number of years ago, and I was doing lots of one-to-one, and I realized actually I miss teams, and there's something about teams. And what I like about teams is even though they can be challenging and to try and lead and manage and everything else, it's that collective intelligence, that collective thinking, the different perspectives, and I love that aspect of things. And of having led teams, but also work with teams, there's something about it how you can solve problems by using individuals in the team may have a problem, but actually using the minds in the room, you can solve problems and get through sort of challenges, or you can support each other. That's when people are not feeling at the best, and so other people take the slack, so to speak. And I think that's what I like about teams. For me, it mirrors how we should be in society and how we should be in the context of our own lives. And we should all have our own team around us, so to speak. A community that not just supports you, because obviously we want people that support us and to cheer us on, and that's really, really healthy and really helpful. But also people to lean on when things are really tough, and to ask questions or advice on something. And I've had many people in my lives who I've leaned on and said, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And that's been really helpful. But also people who will challenge you as well. And I think that's the important thing about teams and communities around us, people who will challenge us, obviously respectfully in a kind way. We're not talking about people shouting at you. And so I think teams for me just mirror the whole how we should live as society, is that sort of have that community around us. And that's why I really love working with teams and seeing the dynamics. And it is complex, and there's lots of dynamics going on. And, it's not easy being sometimes in a team, and it's not always easy leading a team. But yeah, that's where my sort of passion comes from for it.
You can really hear your passion coming across, that kind of love of the potential of people sort of working together.
Mm.
I wanted to ask you about something which you did talk about, you did write about, which is this idea of feeling safe enough to fail in a team. You mentioned that there are times when teams don't always work effectively together.
Mm.
And the picture you painted of this supportive and encouraging and kind of nurturing environment doesn't always relate to the reality of working sometimes with really difficult people who
Mm.
aren't cooperative. And I wonder whether you'd like to say a little bit about, what your thoughts are around creating that kind of safe environment to not always agree.
Yeah, and I think the importance on that whole piece of failure. I mean, there's many views on failure, feedback, and we can get very cliche about it, but the reality is you don't, create innovation or get through challenges unless you have some element of failure or feedback, on however you want to frame that. But if you're in a team where you don't feel you can push the boundaries and push the limits of yourself or the team, because you may, be sort of chastised for it, you may feel you might get sacked for it. It will hinder that innovation. It will hinder that diverse thinking. It will hinder that sort of, people sort of giving you sort of challenging thinking, which I think is really important as a leader, to expect to be challenged. And it's not about, I say, done in a respectful, kind way. And so I think it's important to have that ability to feel safe. And I talk a lot about, I do a lot of stuff with teams on building this psychological safety, where people feel that, happily to, contribute, they can learn, they can take their risks, and they can really sort of embrace that team and feel safe. And so when there's that safety in place, then there is that ability to have that ability to sort of fail. But I always talk a lot about teams and talk about, and I do lots of exercises to help create that. But if the leader takes the lead on this, because I think role modeling is, for me, one of those powerful ways to influence people in your team and people around you. People observe subconsciously, unconsciously, behaviors. And so if you change your behaviors, I do lots of this with working with CEOs and leaders. And if you change your behavior, people will notice it, and that will start having an impact even before you say anything. And so I think as leaders, you need to be open to share about your failures, things that have not quite gone wrong, and show that vulnerability, because as you share that, you open up a space for other people to model you as that example. And it's okay to fail, as long as we look into it, we learn, how can we do it better next time, what else can we think about, and stuff like that. So I think that safety is, to me, really critical. And I've got into teams where I've observed there isn't safety there, and it's taken time to build that in, because it does take time. It's a trust thing. It's a place where you do feel vulnerable, and and I know a wonderful expression of what psychological safety is where vulnerability is rewarded. I think that's sets it up really. You feel vulnerable basically, but if you feel safe to be vulnerable, that's okay, and that's where teams really thrive, when they are highly psychologically safe.
Yeah, that's such a lovely way of describing it, where you feel sort of safe to be vulnerable. And I was actually thinking about that in the context of particularly the leader's role. And you've spoken about how important it is for the leader to be able to show their vulnerability. Um, but I was wondering whether, in terms of your coaching work and in terms of your thinking around resilience, whether you've had to do much work with leaders to help them come to terms with their vulnerability, to get rid of that sort of sense of, being a leader means just getting it right.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about leadership, and I share my own experiences where, you know, you've got this team around you, and some of them are experts, more experts in aspects than you are, and that's okay. As a leader, you're not there to know everything and to know the answers. And I really encourage a lot of my one-to-one clients to get to that place where you don't know the answer, which is okay to not know the answer, which particularly was prevalent, 4 years ago with the pandemic. People didn't know what to do, but it's then to share that in a way that encourages people to then give their different thinking, their different perspectives. If you're thinking, we've got a problem, we've got a challenge here, and I'm working with a business at the moment, they've got some huge challenges, and it's okay for the lead to go, do you know what? These are my ways I'm thinking, but I'd really like us all to think about how we can do this differently. I don't know all the answers. I've got some ideas, but I want to embrace that. And I think it's trying to almost come to that perspective, almost that level of really working sort of in the sort of I suppose on the ground level together on things rather than seeing this hierarchy approach. More or less and less are into that approach. And so I think it's really sharing your failures. I don't know about this. I don't know about that. You're an expert in this. That's why I employ you. That's why we've got you in the team. And then it's as a team, you then start to work and sort of create those ideas. And so I think it's important to have that. But it does take a bit of vulnerability, because I think people have this perception as a leader, you need to know everything. And often organizations, we know, promotes those who are experts technically or the specific skill, but not necessarily the ability to lead and manage people. And actually, sometimes it's best promoting the person who's very good at, creating a vision, leading people, managing people, working with people, actually then being an expert in a particular area, depending on the function and what you work in. But I think it's important to have that in terms of how you lead, and it is feel uncomfortable, because you sharing with your team who perhaps look to you and you're saying, in essence, I don't know. That's hard, but you can sort of, there's always something you might know. You just want to extend it and build up more insights from your team.
Yeah, that's super important. And in fact, you've got so many tips in the book about how to do that. It's a really useful handbook for leaders who might be struggling with that balance between their authority and their sort of feeling of being an authentic leader and their own kind of vulnerability. And it's almost a sophistication when you get to the point of saying, yeah, I'm the leader, but I also don't know lots of things. I like the way you say, I'm employing you because you are able to do these things. You've also written quite a lot about the particular challenge of remote working. And I think that some of the challenges of being a team when you're not in the room together is something that is a lot of people could resonate with that. How do you build that sense of collegial support and mutual kind of understanding when you don't actually spend time together in the same space?
Yeah, I think this is, it was a challenge 4 years ago, but I think it still continues to be a challenge in organizations. More and more organizations I'm talking to now have a hybrid model of some shape or form. I think it's trying to, you can't completely mirror exactly what goes on in person online. That's a reality. I think let's face up to that. It's not the same. When I work with teams, generally I'm in person now, and I prefer that. It's a lot more richer experience. It's a lot more value add, I think, than online. So let's not be thinking, oh, online's the way forward. I think the reality, being together, is better, I think. But it's thinking about ways of when you can, if you are a hybrid sort of model, and trying to create those moments where, I think I've got an example in the book where actually it was a leader I was discussing at the time. It was in COVID, where he would normally have an open door policy, although a lot of organizations have open plan anyway, so it almost becomes irrelevant. But that more of the approachable availability type of thing, where people just come by his desk and share things, no matter who you were. He was the MD, and then he set out, which is interesting. He almost put a Zoom call on all day long, and then would just, when he was free, just look and see if anybody was in the room who wanted to have a chat. And people were aware that he couldn't obviously chat all the time because he was doing other things as well. And so that created that sort of openness and ability to just pop in and have a chat. And whether you do that at specific times or all the time, it's just trying to create that, almost that water cooler moment, that opportunity to share quickly without having to set up a meeting and make it for next week. It's just, I just want to have a quick catch up with you. It'll take 2 minutes, and that can be obviously on the phone as well, because I think that can be quite refreshing. You don't have to always be on a Zoom. You have to look at people, and I think sometimes I've actually preferred just to phone people, and it's just so much easier. Sometimes you can walk around, you can just, I don't know, you don't have to think about your face and what you're looking like, and everything else. So I think just think about that as well. But I think the key thing is just try and maintain that sort of connectivity with your team, and that sense of belonging, and just trying to use it you just got to think a bit more about it if you've got a hybrid team, and trying to go beyond than what you see on screen, and then start to have, perhaps, obviously group stuff, but also one-to-one stuff, just to ensure people's well-being is in a good place. Asking them questions like, not just how are you? Can you say something? How are you? People go, oh yeah, I'm fine, and even though they might not be fine. And I learned a great phrase from a HR leader who said, say, how are you today? And
Yeah.
by putting the time point, it references you to almost think now, and your brain goes, oh, how am I now? Well, actually, I'm feeling a bit like this, or I'm struggling about this particular challenge at the moment. And I think it's having a bit more intentional conversations like that. You should have those anyway in in a context of in person, but I think when you're spread out and remote, I think you just got to be a bit more intentional about it. And how can I, keep that connectivity? How can I increase that communication? How can I watch out for that sort of well-being? What things can we do? More formal things, informal things, and just sort of, and even ask your team. What would be a good thing to do? Would a Friday afternoon sort of half-hour check-in sort of, be good thing to do? Or people perhaps don't want to go back to having quiz nights and all that sort of stuff. It might be too extreme, but it's just ask your team, what do they want? What would work well for them? Because we're all different. Some people quite like the online. They don't have to get too involved with people. They're more introverted versus the extrovert who wants to talk to people. And I think it's just, again, just be more intentional about it. And I think, thinking about how can I meet the needs? How can I have a conversation? How can I understand really what is going on with this individual in a real genuine way?
That thoughtful approach to how people want to be communicated with, I think, seems so important now in the fragile world we find ourselves. And you write in the book about some of the sort of global and political and social environments we find ourselves in. And I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts or any reflections on team resilience at a time when people can feel attacked almost, in terms of their safety, in terms of, catastrophe going on around the world.
Yeah, I think that, the work. I talk about the three things that we're all facing: that uncertainty, failure, and change. It's just been heightened in the last number of years. And I know if you focus on that and aware of that, you'll see more of that reality of that, how our brains work. But there is constant uncertainty, and I think it's, that is the reality we operate in, and it's trying to get to a place, which obviously what I'm here to try and help people is to, you need to incorporate some principles, some ways that will help your teams manage that. And that could be from a team perspective, but it also can be on a personal perspective. And I talk a lot about the personal resilience, and not that, having highly resilient individuals makes a highly resilient team, because it doesn't correlate that way, but it goes some way to helping that sort of cause. And so I think, encouraging individuals to think about their own personal resilience and what that means. And I've got a whole chapter on that in terms of how you build that resilience, how there's many books on there. I only did one chapter, and there's hundreds of books out there that could probably do it far better justice in terms of helping people. But I just give some insights that very quickly, things like, thinking about, get clarity on your purpose, know what you're about, because when you think of a purpose and something bigger than you, it helps you navigate those difficulties in the short term. It almost creates that sort of North Star of who you are, what you're about. Do lots of gratitude. Gratitude, does biochemistry stuff in your brains. It makes you feel good as a reality. These are scientific stuff that's done that. Makes you think more positive about things. When I have those gloomy days, which you all have those gloomy days, or those difficult things, clients sort of lets you down, or you don't win a client, all those things, instead of spiraling, and we all get those challenges, and nothing's going to be smooth. I will intentionally do some gratitude at that point, and it just shifts my focus. It makes me feel good, because all those wonderful dopamine, serotonins flowing around. I start thinking about the positive stuff, and then immediately I start thinking, okay, that's not happened. Okay, What can I learn from that? What can I do things differently next time? And suddenly I go into a more positive mind frame. And so I think it's, getting your team to a place of how can you help them be individually resilient as well, because I think it is tough. It is tough. Businesses are having some real challenges, have been for the last certainly 4 years, but will continue to be as well. And another thing I talk about celebrating success, do that individually, but also as a team. Again, even the small things, even just little small wins, it just helps you psychologically feel better that actually we got onto this next step of this process with a customer, with a client. That's great. We've not got there quite yet, but it would accelerate those little steps along the way. And then mindfulness. I think the reason we get anxious is when people go into the future. People are probably already, well, media doesn't help, fretting about the autumn budget in the UK in terms of what's going to come. And I know it's good to, I'm not saying you don't not be mindful of those things and use it as sometimes there's wisdom in it, and sometimes it can be helpful, but we get so focused on it, our brains feels out of control because it's in the future and you can't control. And so we feel anxious, and therefore it just drives our anxiety, our cortisol, and it starts to create stress unnecessarily sometimes. So again, be mindful of what you listen to media and control that. And then the other thing is, if we go back to the past where we go, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, and even when you're saying the word should, you're just immediately putting yourself into a place of where you can't control, you can't change it now. It's been and gone, so you feel a bit depressed, you get down about things. And so I talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is all about getting into the moment, and it's not all woo-woo stuff. I do this sometimes exercise with teams, and I think they find it a bit odd. Suddenly this guy talking about resilience, and he's just going to do a little bit of mindfulness with us. And by being in the moment, your body, your system is in the most control it can ever be in. Because that's the only bit you can control is in the moment, and therefore you feel at peace. You think clearly. You're more into the prefrontal cortex. You're lowering your cortisol levels, and it helps you massively with problem solving, your day-to-day. And I think look at ways, there's many ways to be mindful, from yoga to doing breathing techniques. There's all different ways of going about it, but I just think encouraging your teams to think about their own personal resilience as well as the collective team resilience as well is really important.
It's interesting what you've done there, actually, is you've sort of done a little bit of modeling for us, in that you've spoken about what you do yourself in terms of those moments where you have your own struggles and what you do to build your resilience. And you've spoken about what you do when you're with teams and helping them. So you've really kind of done, I think, a great job of illustrating that it's not out there, it's not othering. We all have challenges. We all have times when we feel like we need to build our resilience and think about how we can sort of tackle whatever challenge we're in. I did want to ask you specifically about, in the team context, if you have a group of individuals that are pretty resilient, but their leader is not as resilient as them, whether you've come across that and what you have to say about the particular challenge of a leader who's lacking resilience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have I've joined teams which are been highly resilient, high performing, and it's a quite nice sort of pleasure to be part of something like that, because they can sort of carry themselves.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is, leadership is, a really important part of building resilience, having that sort of, clarity of purpose in the team, communication, the role modeling. And so, if a team is resilient as such, and as a leader who is not that way inclined, I would say that would have a detrimental effect longer term. It'll start to bring the team down, because ultimately the leader, will be role modeling potentially behaviors that are not sort of resilience in terms of as a team process or even an individual, and that might have a challenge with the team, and it may cause some dissension. It might cause some sort of real conflict within the team, which in some ways could create some positive and moving forward. But yeah, I think that can be a challenge, and I think with all this, it's not about being, you have to be on your A game all the time. And the reason I talk about resilience as opposed to high performance, in some ways, they're sort of together, really. Because you have a resilient team, you have a high performing team. Because a resilient team has got, clarity of purpose and focus. They've got resilient processes in place to deal with all the difficulties and challenges. They're psychologically safe in terms of, contributing, learning, creating sort of failures okay, and all that sort of stuff. And they have leadership that's really supportive of that. And I think that is ultimately high performance. And so the important thing is, my thread was going there, to be honest. I'm trying to think where I was going with that.
You're comparing high performance teams and resilient teams and saying that there's a lot in common with the two descriptors.
Yeah, and I think it's just having that. I'm sorry, I'm completely lost my train of thought on that. What I was doing with that. But going back to leadership, I think leadership is a vital part of all that. It's not the only part, but it's a vital part that, role models, psychological safety, creates the resilient processes, galvanizes the team to create that sort of purpose. So I think leadership is really important, and I dedicate a whole chapter to think about leadership, and I talk about authentic leadership. Because my own studies and research has shown that authentic leadership promotes team resilience in terms of that approach. And so, I think your question is about having a non-resilient sort of type individual. But the other thing I was getting to is that you don't have to be on your A game all the time. Resilience is not about being all out there, and this is where great thing about teams. Even the leader maybe at some point is feeling a bit. He might have had a personal tragedy. He might have something going on in his own life that is difficult. And I talk about I think airlines do a lot of this, where they regroup every couple of hours on long haul flights, and they check in with each other. And I did this with the rowing team I coached as well, where they created this sort of check-in, sort of 2 or 3 times a day, where they do a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being they're not feeling great, awful, and 5 they're absolutely on it. And everybody'd share their number and a very brief, I'm a 1 because I'm feeling seasick, I'm not feeling great, not got no energy, not keeping any food down me. And somebody said I'm a 5, full on, lots of energy, really on it. And therefore you proportion the tasks to the person, or the capacity to the ones who've got the 4s and 5s, and give the 1s and 2s a break. And again, that's the same within the team. A leader may say, look, I'm really finding this really difficult today, of whatever reason, and use that. So I think it's being mindful that we're not all going to be on it number 5 all the time. And I think that's it's been real with people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that you do that really nicely in the book. I think emphasize the fact that our resilience isn't static, that it does fluctuate. And I think that what you've described there in terms of team also applies to ourselves, doesn't it? When we're, there's times when we can do so much more, and there's other times when we've got to just, get on the sofa with a book and, and just have some time to think. I wanted to just sort of pull together some of these thoughts. It's been so interesting to hear you as expert and coach and your wisdom on resilience. So thank you so much for sharing it all. But the book itself has a very practical structure, in that you've got insights and you've got opportunities to do lots of things, and a really kind of helpful way to open people's understanding to these different topics that we've started to explore. But I wanted just to close with something which you write about, which is the myth of Icarus. And it's such a wonderful extra dimension to that myth. And I wonder whether we could sort of end our conversation with you just describing that to the listeners, and why you chose to include that in the book.
Yes, this came out of I was having a walk with a friend of mine, one of my supporters, and we support each other as well. And he was I think he'd read a book about the Icarus story, and how everybody knows the story about him flying too close to the sun and his wings melted. nobody knows about he was warned to not fly too close to the sea, and the salt water would get into his feathers as well, and he would, again, impacting his flying abilities. And there's this ability about flying just at the right level, and I thought it was a wonderful analogy,
Yes.
because it's not all about this pushing people, to the nth degree and get as much out of people, but being mindful. And it's almost it almost gives the picture of fly to the middle line really, and don't fly too close to the sun where you're pushing everybody and everybody's working really hard, and you end up with burnout basically. And that's what will happen. That's the ultimate result of that, and then people are off for months or even years sometimes. And so that it's being mindful of that, and that's that thing about checking in with people and at the team where they're at, and whether you do it in numbers or just in conversation. But that's really important. And then the other thing is not fly too close to the sea, and that's almost about being complacent and a bit lackadaisical and not really doing anything, or being fearful of what's next, the future, and holding back. And I think, again, be mindful of that in a team. And is there a lack of vision that's creating that sort of sense of complacency? Is it a lack of psychological safety, so people are not pushing the boundaries for themselves? So again, it's trying to get that middle line. And it will ebb and flow, and at times it might get too close, and then maybe, I've worked in business where there's a seasonality to business. You're going to head into September and it's going to be quite stressful, and but it's being mindful and aware of that and think, okay, while we're in that moment, how do we look out for each other? How do we check in with each other? How do we take breaks at weekends and all that sort of stuff? And it's being aware of the potentials of those sort of seasonalities of work. If you've got no season, it's completely all go all the time. I think you need to rethink things. But yes, it's trying to create that balance. And I don't always like using the word balance, because it feels like one's a trade-off, but it's that sort of holistic approach, thinking, be mindful of people's well-being as much as their high performance as well.
Can I sneak in a final question, Julian?
You can go for it.
So first of all, this book will help you to navigate that Icarus myth, that sort of being too close to the sun or too close to the sea. But I wanted to ask you, at the end of this period of, it's hard work writing a book, and it's sort of, you're a busy person and you're doing so much. What have you learned about yourself at the end of this process?
Well, I've learned that I can write a book. And I know some people have this desire in them to write a book. I've never had that desire. It came out of my own purpose about helping teams to become more resilient, and so that overflowed within the book, in the sense of, I did some research, I did some study with my psychology masters, and realized there wasn't much out there. And so that's the why behind it, really. What have I learned? It's been really helpful for me to reflect on all the stuff I've been doing with teams over the last few years, and not that I put it into a process as such. I don't like so rigid of that. There's some principles, and so I've observed. I've been doing things, and then I'm thinking, actually, I've been doing similar things. I've observed. I'm working with teams on purpose. I've been working with teams on psychological safety, and etc. etc. And so I've learned, actually, there's a real thread in that, which has been really helpful to reflect on that. And also, just reflecting on my own career and thinking, actually, in some ways, I wish I had this, even sometimes 10, 15 years ago, this understanding, because it would have really helped me in the situations I explained in the book as well. So that's been really valuable. It's I suppose made me even more passionate about helping teams by distilling it into those words, and also other ideas have come out of it as well. And I don't know, like you, I got to a place in the book where I was like, oh, I've just done something with teams. Oh, can I include that? And think, oh, that'd be really interesting. And there's other stuff that could come from it. And so, yeah, it sparks more ideas and more insights as well. So it's been a really good journey. And I've been told that the writing the book the process of it is probably more valuable sometimes than the piece at the end. It's been, and I think because I've included quite a broad input from a lot of people. I interviewed over 30 people, and they've not all been included, but that has also shaped my thinking and my understanding. And I realised what I've got here is nothing wildly unique here. Let's be honest here. There's nothing new under the sun, in my perspective. I know some people come out with, "Oh, this is new." It's not really. I've just put it into a format that is really pragmatic and practical, and really helpful from my own experience of what I've observed and what I've done myself. But it's been just putting that together with other people's insights from a podcast as well. It's been really enjoyable, and I've genuinely enjoyed the process. I didn't think I would. I was very passionate about writing, getting on with it, and this book was finished in end of April. It's been the whole process, but after that took the time. That was probably a little bit more frustrating time. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, well, it's been really enjoyable to talk to you, Julian, and to hear your enthusiasm and your knowledge, and to have a chance to explore things with you as expert and you as the guest. So thank you for having me as your host.
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for being the host, and it was fantastic, and I enjoyed it, and I felt it just, as all my guests tend to feedback, it went really quickly. I didn't even look at the clock, to be honest, and suddenly we're here over 36 minutes. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.